Destiny of a Savior by Famous Fault. Chapter 7. The Boy and the Ghost. The graveyard was green and surrounded by trees, not something Yugi had expected when he went to visit the graves of the tomb keepers. Once again he regretted not having been there. He would never have allowed them to be buried. They had been buried for the majority of their lives. They shouldn't have to be buried in death, too. Ryo and Yugi had closed the shop for a week to travel to Egypt. All three of them intend on visiting the country where it had all begun thousands of years ago. They stayed in the same city as where Tem had once lived, El Tarif.
The city has changed,
Tem had said, looking around himself, and his tone had indicated that he did not like the differences. It looks nothing like it, Yugi had said, awestruck, and wondered where the grand palace he had walked through had disappeared to.
Not much is preserved from the early dynastic period. That's why there is so little evidence of the Shadow Games or the Millennium items. In the end, it's a good thing. Not much is left.
Though, in Yugi's opinion, Atem still didn't seem happy about it. The tomb keepers' graves were also in El Tarif, and although Ryo didn't actually know any of them, he still went with Yugi to pay his respects. Yugi told Ryo the events he had missed concerning the Ishtars when under Bakura's control, and Ryo had listened, fascinated. When doing that on the graveyard, it was almost as if the Ishtars were standing next to them and telling their versions too. They spent there an hour, mostly in silence. They got some odd glances from other people, as this was the first time anyone had bothered showing up at the graves. Neither Ryo nor Yugi really cared, though, as long as they weren't recognized. Even here, Ryo left a white rose on each grave. It was the last thing he did before they left the graveyard. It was only their first day there, and they had left the whole day free for that little visit, and although the visit hadn't taken more than an hour, Yugi was glad they had. He really didn't feel like following any strict course of events. Instead, they wandered through the city. Yugi could feel Atem's musings as the former king watched the city he had once called his. He wasn't too happy about the changes, but there was also something accepting over him. God found the ring in a city just like this one, Ryo mused and looked around. I wonder how many more of all these items are cursed. Yugi shuddered. I hope none, though it would be naive to think so. Unconsciously, Yugi clasped a hand around the little red bag with the undetectable extension charm. Ryo noticed it, but did not ask. They just looked around, all lost in thought. Do you miss it? Yugi asked the pharaoh.
I miss the people at times, but I'm glad the war with the tomb robber, the priest, and Zork is over. I think I more miss the reign I could have had than the one I had in the end.
Atem explained.
I wish I could have done more for my people.
There is no pharaoh who has done more, Yugi said with a frown. It was the only thing he did not understand. Why did Atem think so little of what he had done?
I never saw my people happy. I saw them in hardship and suffering. I know that my actions made sure that Set could lead the country into an era of well-being and peace. Yet I can't get the burning villages and dead soldiers out of my mind. It feels as if I left it in rubble, and I did. My heart couldn't see the aftermath, so it feels like a failure.
Atem appeared in spectral form next to Yugi and glared around himself.
Had they looked happy now, it would have been easier. But they don't.
Atem's words were true. Not a single person looked happy in the town. In fact, the mood seemed rather gloomy. Despite the burning hot sun, the atmosphere was cold. It was a remarkable experience, although not a very pleasant one. Both ignored the sharp staring of the locals. They stood out everywhere in the world and were used to being looked at like strangers. Yugi didn't really know what to tell Starker. Telling him that he hardly could be held responsible for what happened to a country over the course of 5,000 years would not help. It was already nearing midday when Yugi noticed that something was off about Ryo. I have to get out of the sun, the albino whispered, a sound that indicated that he was in pain. Yugi scolded himself. He should have thought about the fact that Ryo was far more sensitive to the sun than people tended to be, having nearly no natural protection against it at all. Why didn't you say something sooner? Yugi asked, horrified, and looked around. Then he dragged Ryo into something which resembled a pub. It was, however, nearly deserted. Most people had to be at home, smart enough to avoid the heat of the day. Yugi realized that they'd be stuck here a couple of hours. A man appeared behind the bar, and he did not look happy. Without a warning, Yugi withdrew to his soul, leaving Atem in control. "Why?" the pharaoh asked, hardly able to hide his surprise. Rio looked shocked and a bit troubled, but he did not comment it. "They were your people," was all Yugi said, then shut the link, leaving Atem no choice. Atem sighed a bit and went with a hand through his unusual hair before walking further into the pub, followed closely by Rio, who still looked troubled and was glancing around him as if he expected to be attacked at any moment.
"Tourists?"
he asked with a strongly accented English.
"Not completely."
Atem replied in perfect Arabic.
"You behave like them.
The bartender said, condescending.
Only they would be stupid enough to be out here at this time of day. If you're not tourists, then what is your deal here?"
It was as if the man became even more wary of them on learning they weren't tourists.
"I used to live here a long time ago."
Atem said and looked around, as if he was expecting to recognize the place.
"I just wanted to see it again."
The man snorted.
"Fool, you should have stayed away. Things aren't safe around here. If I could, I'd take my bags and leave. What about your friend?"
Atem glanced at Rio to see his reaction, but Rio hadn't understood a word. Atem translated the brief conversation roughly for him. "I'm his friend." Rio answered the bartender's question, deciding to tell only a part of the truth. "I came along because it means something to him." Atem smiled, knowing very well it wasn't the only reason, but also that Rio's words had been true. It was something that made him grateful, although his gratefulness was easily overshadowed by his worry.
"What do you mean by things not being safe around here?"
Atem asked a little hesitatingly. A forward approach wasn't usually the best in circumstances as the one they were in, but the man had been unusually forward with them.
"The same things as always,"
the man said with a sigh. Then he shook his head, clearly deciding they could not be trusted, and switched to English.
"Next time someone asks you, tell them you're tourists. You look pretty enough to get away with it. Take it as a friendly warning."
"Warnings aren't friendly,"
Rio muttered with a frown where he stood with his arms crossed in a timid gesture. "Here they are,"
the man said.
"Don't trust anyone. If you want to know more about the town, ask the guides, not the locals."
Atem had a lot of objections against that, grounded objections, but the look on the man, reminding slightly of Hagrid, kept him from it. Being forced to get to know the city where he grew up in as a tourist seemed to make his entire fate worse. Rio looked at Atem. "I'm sorry," he whispered in Japanese and put a hand on his shoulder. Atem nodded at him as thanks and sat down on one of the chairs at the bar. Rio sat down next to him.
"Is that Chinese?"
the barman asked. "Japanese," Rio answered. He was sounding just as unhappy as Atem felt. "Have you got something to drink?"
"Name something,"
the barman said, glad that the conversation had taken a better turn.
"Water,"
Rio said, looking worn by the hot weather. It was quite clear that he was more affected by the heat than either of the other two. The three spent some time chatting about casual things which did not matter. When Rio and Atem left the pub, Yugi took back control. The few hours had completely ruined the king's mood, and Yugi had started to wish that they hadn't come here. It would hardly help Atem to learn that his country was in turmoil. It would increase his feeling of being a failure. Yugi sighed and kicked a rock. Atem wouldn't tell him how he felt. Yugi knew that. He would lock it away inside and let it eat away at him. He would feel like he should do something, but he wouldn't say it for Yugi's sake. "I don't think you can do much about it," Yugi told his somewhat surprised pharaoh. "I know you inside out. Did you expect for me not to know how this would affect you?"
"I've fought for this country before, why couldn't I now?"
Atem asked.
"I know I have no right to ask something like that from you, but why do you think I can't help them?"
"Because..." Yugi searched for the right words to explain the differences. "Your previous wars were good versus evil. Even the Wizarding War. Demon against humans. Here there are no clear good or evil sides. Which side is good or evil depends on point of view. Neither side is good, but neither is evil. It's simply two different human opinions clashing since they both think they can't live in peace next to the other. In addition to that, these are two armies of humans. Nothing supernatural is going on here."
"You're right,"
Atem sighed.
"I just want to see my people happy."
"Understandable, but perhaps you should stop thinking about them as your people," Yugi suggested carefully as they reached the hotel. Atem's reply was sharper than Yugi had expected.
No, they will always be my people. That's not something I can change, Yugi. I will not interfere in the things here, but that doesn't mean that I don't care.
Yugi didn't answer, slightly taken aback by the reply, but he understood how stupid his words had been, as if asking a parent to stop thinking about their children as just that, their children. He looked at the ground as Rio opened the door to their room. The Rio had clearly picked up that something was wrong. He might not be able to hear the conversations, but he could read Yugi's expression. Everything okay, Yugi? Yugi shook his head truthfully, but did not say anything. He was with his thoughts at Hogwarts again, wondering how they were doing in this time of war. That war, on the other hand, was one where they could have helped, yet they had chosen not to. Why? Yugi wondered that often. Why had they chosen to leave? Because they weren't welcome. Because that world had destroyed everything they cared for. Because it should not know about the shadows. Yugi knew the answers, yet still, he knew how he felt about knowing that his students were in a world ripped and torn. It had to be worse for Atem, who had to see a whole nation in turmoil. The turmoil here was not as obvious as it had been in the wizarding world. Here it was still at the beginning stages. They all felt it was there, though, and that was bad enough. Are you okay? Yugi asked in his turn, returning to the world.
Nervous?
Rio confessed. It was understandable. Tomorrow they'd visit Kol Elna. Kol Elna was where it had all started. The place where Zork had been revived and where Rio's previous life had lived. Visiting the place where the Millennium items had been created would be a challenge on all of them. The albino collapsed on the bed.
Maybe this was a bad idea.
Yugi understood what Rio meant. They both felt like going home, yet Yugi shook his head. Even if it was only for the Ishtars, this had to be done. Rebecca was used to odd situations. She had, however, not expected for them to continue after having died. Apparently, even when dead, odd situations tended to come look for her. Just her luck. Being in a bathroom with Moaning Myrtle waiting for an unknown person counted as weird, according to Rebecca. Rebecca did not like Moaning Myrtle, something she shared with the majority of the school, including the ghosts. Myrtle complained too much. Sulked too much for Rebecca's taste. Moaning Myrtle, in her turn, did not like Rebecca either, so the two mostly avoided each other. That was why Rebecca was sincerely surprised when Moaning Myrtle came to find her and asked for help. Moaning Myrtle had come to Rebecca to ask her for help a few days ago. Rebecca had not believed her dead ears, but she had heard Myrtle out. And although Myrtle had been vague, Rebecca had agreed to help. Myrtle had claimed she wasn't asking help for herself, but that she had been trying to help someone and had failed. She was hoping that Rebecca could. Rebecca didn't think it was true, at least not the entire truth. Yep, here she was, not being able to help her curiosity, waiting in a bathroom with Moaning Myrtle. Rebecca had hidden herself in a window close to the ceiling. Myrtle was simply standing there in the middle of the boys' toilets. Rebecca had decided not to question it. It didn't take long. The door opened and in walked two people. Rebecca could tell from the expression on Myrtle's face that they were not the ones she had been waiting for. Rebecca recognized them as Harry and Ron when she drew a bit nearer. They had not seen her, and with some mean comments from Ron, Myrtle howled and dived into a toilet. The two boys exchanged some condescending comments before leaving the bathroom. Rebecca shook her head, displeased, although with a smug smile. It seemed she was the only one who saw the humor in the situation. Two boys had been chased away from the men's lavatory by a girl. It was slightly ironic. With a frown, Rebecca wondered if she should go after Myrtle, but decided against it. Even dead, diving into a toilet was not something she deemed as a very tasty idea. Her musings were, however, unnecessary. The door to the bathroom opened once again, and a blond boy walked in. Rebecca felt as if she should recognize him, but didn't. Myrtle emerged from the toilet and welcomed the boy with soft words. The boy, however, did not seem like he wanted to be comforted. He made a gesture as if to push Myrtle away and averted his face from her. From his robes, Rebecca made out that he was a Slytherin, 6th or 7th year, she did not know. She hated the feeling telling her she should know who he was, but she couldn't grasp it. Being dead made things harder. Names, faces, and personalities had blurred together. It were the people she had made close contact with she could keep apart. In the beginning, it had been hard. She had even confused Ron with Fred and Dean with Seamus. Now it wasn't like that anymore, but she had never noticed this boy after she got her humanity back and did not remember who he was.
The year is coming to an end,
he snapped at Myrtle.
I'm running out of time.
Shh, Myrtle said.
I did something for you. Someone who can perhaps give you some answers is here.
Rebecca understood that Myrtle meant her. But what answers could she give anyone? She had made clear that she wouldn't say a thing at the beginning of the year. She came closer and could now see his face. His features were sharp and familiar. She had most definitely seen features like those before. Not exactly the same, but a lot. It had been someone who mattered to her, someone she did not like. But it hadn't been this boy.
You!
The boy called out as he saw Rebecca and recoiled from her. Even his voice reminded her of someone. It had been the last voice she had heard before she died. Rebecca's frown grew. That was her answer. A voice before a heavy feeling against her back. That voice belonged to a face. A face of a man with blonde hair and black robes. A man who had killed her. Lucius Malfoy. Satchujin Shah. Pieces fell into place in her head. Draco Malfoy, she whispered and moved even closer. He was the son of the man who had killed her.
Fine! He called out and turned to Myrtle. Why would you do this? How much does she know? You promised! I thought I could trust you!
Myrtle recoiled from the clearly furious Draco and started sulking in a corner. Rebecca might not like Myrtle, but she would not stand and watch the same. She hasn't told me anything, she snapped.
Then why?
He asked, having lowered his voice. He faced neither Rebecca nor Myrtle. He seemed to ask a deity neither of the two ghosts could see. It was a question Rebecca also wanted an answer on. She turned to look at Myrtle.
Because some of the things you tell me, you shouldn't tell me. They're not meant for me. I just wanted to make you feel better,
Myrtle said and looked at Draco hopefully. Draco opened his mouth to yell at Myrtle again, but Rebecca was faster.
Her intentions were good. That's the main point.
Myrtle threw Rebecca a grateful look.
Get lost!
Draco said and turned away from her, facing the mirrors on the wall. Rebecca could see he had his eyes cast to the ground. There was something incredibly broken over him. She did as he had told her, turned to get out of the bathroom.
Where did you stay?
Rebecca turned back again, surprised at Draco's question. She met his eyes in the mirror he was looking in. She stood a couple of meters behind him, and they could both be seen in the mirror. It looked like a scene from a horror movie, a ghost meeting the eyes of someone alive through a mirror.
What do you mean?
She asked, her voice hardly even a whisper.
Why didn't you move on? Like most people do when they die. Why did you become a ghost?
He sounded simply pissed, but Rebecca detected a tone behind his words, which was much less aggressive.
That is something which surpasses you. Something I can't explain, even if I wanted to.
Rebecca looked up at the ceiling, breaking their eye contact.
Something more important than just life and death.
Draco turned around to face her.
So you did not stay just to make me feel bad? Rebecca gawked for a second before gathering herself.
She shook her head, both to comprehend his words and to answer his question.
No, I did not. My death doesn't mean so much to me. Not in that way, anyway. Sure, I want to live, but I was bound to die sooner or later anyway. I was more worried how it would affect others.
Professor Moondum,
Draco said darkly, understanding her words.
He almost killed Dad.
I'm glad he didn't,
Rebecca retorted calmly, taking Draco by surprise.
Those are my revenge or something,
he called out, frustrated that he didn't understand. Rebecca shook her head slowly, not taking her eyes off the Slytherin.
No, I learned a long time ago that vengeance only leads to despair. It is something that will backfire, it just does. Are you mad?
At who?
Draco snapped, clearly not knowing how to handle the situation.
At Professor Muto, for almost killing your dad,
Rebecca clarified.
Draco shook his head. I don't know, he barked. He told me he would have killed Dad had he gotten there before the Aurors, but the Dark Lord told me that he could have killed Dad easier than I could kill a kitten, yet chose to let him live. I don't know anything anymore! His fist made uncomfortable contact with the wall next to the mirror, cracking the skin on his knuckles. Why would Professor Muto lie?
You don't know him, Rebecca said, still whispering. He hates your dad enough to kill him. Don't doubt that. But for them, especially for the spirit, so much more is at stake than just vengeance. They'd have to pay dearly if they would do such a thing in blind hatred. A price that would affect us all.
What did Dad do to him? Draco asked, his anger deflated.
You don't know? She asked, honestly surprised.
Draco clenched his jaw and shook his head. No, though I'd love to know. Rebecca was getting annoyed by his aggressive attitude, but she also understood him. There was no denying that she herself would have reacted just as aggressive. She counted to 10, then sighed.
Well over 5 years ago, things were ending. The spirit was leaving with his power, and he would enter the afterlife. Your father, however, felt the magic unleashed by the event, and felt threatened by it. He decided to destroy it. He simply attempted to kill everyone present, and although he failed in killing everyone, the majority of the people Professor Muto and the spirit cared for got murdered. There were only 3 survivors, among them Yugimoto. The other 9 died. The actions of your father took away the spirit's chance to go to the afterlife, and thus he was stuck here too, with his power. The two have ever since treasured a deep hatred towards Lucius Malfoy.
Draco had gone even more pale than he tended to be.
He killed 9 people? He asked, his tone indicating that he couldn't comprehend it. 10, if you count me in,
Rebecca said, unmercifully honest.
And probably a whole lot of other people.
Draco looked down again. I know.
No, you don't!
Rebecca said. Her voice was venomous, although her tone calm.
You have never lost someone in such a way, so you don't know what it really means. They were my friends too, you know. I traveled with Otogi through America, and I spent a whole summer with Junichi, Anzu, Honda, and Yugi. I even knew Mokuba and Kaiba in some weird way. To find out that nearly all these people were dead was among the worst things that ever happened to me. They told us the tomb collapsed. I believed it at the time. Now I know a whole lot better, and I too hate your murderer of a father. You don't know what he did. You can't.
Draco recoiled as if someone had hit him, but bit back like an injured puppy. What has that to do with me? I've never killed anyone. Rebecca simply raised an eyebrow.
I suppose not. You asked me what your father did to Professor Muto. I answered.
She took a pause, thinking over her words.
Sure, I replied to more than you asked for, but I don't regret a single word. Regrets don't suit me.
You gave your life, even your afterlife, for the thing you considered as the right one. How do you do it? He asked. His anger had vanished again. It was painfully obvious that he was backed into a corner, though Rebecca hadn't figured out what kind of corner yet. It was clear that it was stressing him to no end, almost breaking him. Rebecca shook her head.
At times, I can be narrow and proud, but have never been selfish, and always determined. I've just made up my mind about something and decided that whatever happened, I would achieve it, and I did. I didn't even settle for the right thing. I just decided to help a friend.
She smiled meekly, almost satisfied.
I just had a goal, and then it wasn't so hard to just blindly head that way, even if that meant dying.
You never cared about the dangers, Draco hissed. I can't be that brave.
In my case, it was far from bravery that made me go to the ministry. Actually, I never even considered the dangers. I just refused to see them. It was plain stupidity.
She was still smiling a tad sheepishly. I don't understand you good guys, Draco yelled. You don't give anything for your lives. Rebecca smiled and disappeared.
No, that's not true. We value our lives a lot, but some of us just know that death is an unavoidable consequence of war.
Then her gaze sharpened.
What are you up to, Draco? You have already told me that you have a connection to Voldemort.
Don't say his name! Draco hissed furiously. Deal with it! Rebecca said, sounding more like a teenager than she had for quite a while. She shook her head, hearing her own voice, and it regained its gravity. And here you are, almost crying, and looking as if you are about to break any second. Draco straightened himself and looked at her, his eyes daggers. That is none of your business! Rebecca gave a resigned sigh and nodded. Perhaps not. Then she turned to Myrtle, who was still hovering in a corner, having listened, fascinated to the conversation. Thanks, Myrtle. I'm glad you gave me this opportunity. Then she turned towards the door, not since it was her only way of leaving, but because it was something symbolic. Don't worry, Malfoy. I won't tell a soul about this encounter. She levitated towards the door and stopped right in front of it. There is always a choice. With those words, she left the bathroom. Dumbledore had mended the hourglasses 100 times at this point. Every time, as soon as he averted his eyes, they broke again. The students never noticed. As far as they were concerned, he had never bothered mending them. He was at a loss over what happened. He knew that Professor Marcheshon had burned down the banners. The professor hadn't even denied it. He did, however, deny that he had anything to do with the hourglasses, and Dumbledore believed him. The headmaster always knew everything that was of his concern. That was just the way it was, especially when it concerned his school. Except for now. He had tried a majority of spells to make sure that the hourglasses could not be broken again. But it was useless. No matter how powerful the spells, the hourglasses got literally blown up again anyway. Whoever was doing it was very powerful. It was not Rebecca, like some claimed. Everyone knew that ghosts could not affect anything, least of all blow something up, and before that would change, a whole lot had to happen. It wasn't a student either. No student Dumbledore knew about would have been able to get through his spells. It wasn't Mahad either. The magician hadn't lied when Dumbledore had asked him about it. It wasn't a teacher, since no teacher would destroy something that the founders had created. Who had done it was a plain mystery. Truth be told, Dumbledore enjoyed the lack of house points, but it was not how the founders had intended it to be, so the hourglasses had to be mended. It was just not working. Dumbledore paced back and forth in the entrance hall. There were enough people who disliked the house system, but not one of them could destroy the hourglasses. It was a little past midnight, and Dumbledore was staring at the hourglasses, which he had just repaired. He was pretty sure that by morning, they would be scattered all over the floor again, and Filch would clean it up before the first students would leave the dormitories. He considered staying there all night, but he knew it was no use. He, Severus, Minerva, and several others had already held watch throughout the night to see who destroyed the hourglasses. The odd thing was that they simply exploded while they were watching, and not one of them had seen who had done it. An invisible force was working against the houses, and Dumbledore couldn't decide whether that force was friend or foe. Not that it mattered much, they couldn't do anything about it. Then and there the hourglasses blew up. Dumbledore was just fast enough to shield his face before the glass reached him. Some bits got stuck in his cursed hand, but he didn't even feel it. He caught a streak of white when he removed his hand, but it was hard to say if it was something fleeing or a trick of the eye. The hall was still deserted. Dumbledore sighed and pushed his glasses a bit further up his nose. Forces of unknown origin were playing at Hogwarts, and he did not like it. He hoped he would find out its nature before he had to leave the school. He was not comfortable with just letting them play. He cleaned up the mess with a wave of his wand and decided to go to bed. It was hard to find something that could not be seen.